I'm Mary Obana. Welcome to Shine. I'm all about friendly, soul-nourishing, spiritually inspired conversations that expand perspectives and offer practical guidance so you can live joyfully and shine brightly. I believe everyone has something special within them, a unique gift, a light you are to find and share with the world. You are meant to shine. I believe you have a deep knowing, guidance that is ready to serve you. It is always available if you listen. I believe you are meant to live with complete joy and peace, nothing less. It's just awaiting your allowing. Ready to get to it? Here we go. Hi there. I'm glad you're here. Last episode, I shared a spiritual perspective of my own understanding on processing the loss of a loved one. But grief comes in many forms and is experienced uniquely by each one of us. In my work and in my life, I have seen this. I'm sure you have as well. I think most of us associate grief, perhaps exclusively, with death. But there are so many other experiences that produce grief, and we don't even realize it. But here's the good news. There are those who devote their lives helping people to move beyond loss and to recovery. Joy and light can be experienced again. I invited grief recovery specialist Ann Dale to chat with me about this very topic. There's so much to understand. I hope you find the conversation interesting and helpful. Hello, Ann. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me today.
Ann, you have an interesting background. Tell me how you've been led to this work.
I have a holistic healing practice where I do spiritual energy work, Reiki, and some other things like that. But I noticed that my clients, some of them who were grieving, still didn't really get the relief that they wanted from the energy work. I also had a very good friend, my best friend, who did grief recovery work. When she died 3 years ago, she left me money so that I could become a grief recovery specialist. And so that's what I did. And it was wonderful to have another way to help people with grief.
What a beautiful way to honor your friend, to continue her work in this way. I think we all have an idea of what grief is, but what's the technical definition of grief?
Grief is the normal and natural reaction to significant emotional loss of any kind. It is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior.
I think most people associate grief perhaps exclusively with the loss of a loved one. But I recall you sharing with me that there are over 40 types of grief. Can you share with us what those might be?
So some of the things are loss of a pet, divorce, a change in financial status, a change in health status. It's any change or anything that's different in your life. For instance, you could want to buy a new house. You're all excited to buy a new house and move. That can also be a grief event because you're leaving behind your old house and a lot of memories. Sometimes people retire and they've been looking forward to it. They retire, but it takes them a while to get into the groove of things. They miss seeing everybody. They miss their old job. Sometimes there are intangible losses, such as loss of trust, loss of safety, loss of self-esteem, and those are grief events in of themselves.
Wow, that's really interesting because when you think of grief more broadly, not just limited to the death of a loved one, there are certainly things in our lives that we experience when there's an end to something that's familiar. Why is it so important for us to manage grief, particularly since many of these grief experiences may go unaddressed?
Grief, if you don't manage it or address it, it gets stored in our body.
And that happens because?
They don't think of other things as counting as grief. They don't think about things that perhaps happened to them a long time ago, and grief is cumulative. I use an invisible backpack. Somebody says something unkind to you when you're little. You remember it now, so that was a rock that you threw in that backpack. A pet dies. A grandparent dies. For each one of those things, you throw a rock into the backpack. Sometimes the rocks are bigger than others because they are more significant or affect your life more significantly. And you're just carrying around this heavy. It just gets heavier and heavier because we all experience some kind of grief, even though we don't recognize it as grief.
What do those signs look like? How do we know, or what are the common responses then to grief?
So some of the most common responses to grief that people don't always recognize are some people have disrupted sleeping patterns for years after they have a loss of any kind. Reduced concentration is a very common response after somebody dies, and that can last for quite a long time. You get things mixed up. You walk into one room and you can't remember what you came there for. You sometimes forget words and you think that you're losing your mind. You're grieving. It's part of grief, but people don't understand that part of it. Obviously, changed eating habits. Some people can't stop eating because they're trying to fill that void, and other people just can't eat, so they stop eating. So there's change. When you're first told about a death or something very sad or bad, there's a sense of numbness. Some people feel numb, and that's mistaken for denial. You're not in denial. You know they died, but you just feel numb, like you just almost, it just doesn't feel real to you, but you know that it's real. And there's just a roller coaster of emotional energy that happens. Sometimes you're fine. 5 minutes later, a song can come on. You can drive past a special tree and it triggers and you're crying. That goes on. There's no time limit on grief. There's just none. So everybody grieves differently. Everybody's individual. Every grief event that each person experiences is individual to them. There can be 2 or 3 people that have all had a mother die. Their friend's mother dies. Oh, we know how you feel, they'll say. Nobody knows how you feel. Only you know how you feel about that.
When someone we care about is experiencing grief, what are we to say? What are we to do? Can you give us advice on that?
You can tell them you're sorry for their loss, but it's really hard. You just kind of have to just go be with them, sit with them. It's called holding space for them. You just have to be there for them and let them be however they want to be. If you have a friend who's isolating, you might go over and bring something to them that would cheer them up for a few minutes and stay for a bit, or get them to go out. Everybody is so unique, but if you know somebody that's grieving, the best thing you can do is just be a friend. You just be there for them and you sit right there, and you're going to be uncomfortable and they might be uncomfortable, but you sit there anyway because they need you to do that. There really is nothing that you can say that will make, if somebody's died or any kind of loss, it makes it any better. What we say oftentimes is intellectual, like, well, say somebody got a divorce, you're still young, you'll find somebody else, you'll find somebody better. While that intellectually may be true, it doesn't help them. It's not what they're feeling right now. Or, you can get another dog or a cat if you can, that's replacing the loss. That doesn't help them feel better because they're missing the dog or cat, the pet that they've lost right then and there.
So, Anne, what are the things that are commonly misunderstood about grief?
Some of the myths about grief are that time heals all wounds, which it doesn't. What time does is you just get used to living with whatever your loss is. Replacing the loss. A lot of people have lost a pet and they get another pet to replace it. It doesn't replace the pet that you lost. Or you're teaching kids, for instance, because there's a grief program for kids, that you can replace a loss. You just get something else. But then when a person dies, you can't ever replace the person. So that's not a great way to do it. Grieve alone, a lot of people think they need to isolate. So they don't want people to see them crying or being sad. They want to act like they're okay, because people will say after a couple of months, I can't believe that person's still crying about that. It's been a couple of months, or it's been a year, or it's been a year and a half. Because that's a common misconception that you should be over it after a certain amount of time. And that's just not true. So people do that alone, or be strong. So a lot of times we go out and we act strong. We go out to the grocery store. Oh, how are you? And we'll say, oh, we're fine. How are you? Well, I show the picture to people of fine is the tip of the iceberg. And then underneath, it's, 500 times the size of the top of the tip of the iceberg. So that's being strong. And being strong doesn't show other people how to grieve or that it's okay to grieve. And keep busy. One of them is keep busy. So a lot of people go to work, or they go out and they, do a lot of yard work, or whatever they do to keep busy, or you read a book, anything to distract you from thinking about it, because grief is such a hard thing. I think it's the most difficult human emotion that there is. There's a lot of grief that a lot of people carry around with them. Everybody has grief.
So what is the difference between working with a grief recovery specialist and a therapist?
So a grief recovery specialist will walk you through a 7-week plan. There are very specific steps for what you are going to work on and what you are going to do. There's an end frame for what you're going to do. And you're only talking specifically about grief. When you see a therapist, there is no end point. You do therapy until you're done. And sometimes you talk about things that aren't grief and work on some things that aren't just about what your grief is. So this is an educational program. It's not therapy, but you do get some therapeutic benefits from this program.
And how did the grief recovery method or process come to be?
Well, people will tell you that you have to let go and move forward with your life, but they don't ever tell you how to do that. The grief recovery method was developed and refined by the man who founded it, John James, when he lost his beautiful 4-year-old son. Nothing was working for him, and so he came up with all of this, and it helped him. It took him a while, but he worked through it, the emotional piece, and he wanted to share it with the world. So he created this program. He wrote the book. The book's been, revised a few times. I think the book we're using now, I know it's the 20th edition. So there's a lot of research that went into that, 30 years worth. And he learned the steps that will help you recover from loss. And everybody will have somebody supportive to help with loving guidance every step of the way.
So this process of not taking an intellectual approach to it, but more of a diving into the emotional part of this whole process is what is kind of essential to healing.
Yeah, because grief is about emotion. It's not intellectual. It's not part of our intellect. It's part of our emotional process. So we have hopes, dreams, and expectations for every relationship, for a lot of situations that we have. And when those situations end, somebody dies, somebody leaves a relationship, you're left with all of these unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations. And that is grief. So, and it's your heart that feels that. There's nothing intellectual about that. You can intellectualize it, and that's what most people try to do, is intellectualize it. But it doesn't get down into your heart, what your heart's feeling, and the emotional part of it.
And healing only begins when you do.
It begins when you start to get to the emotional part. And you have a very specific way with this program to do that. The steps have been proven over and over again to help people work through this.
Yeah, I found it fascinating that the grief recovery method is really an outreach program, because the Grief Recovery Institute has this guiding principle and mission to deliver grief recovery assistance to the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time, and using all of this evidence-based research that has been accumulated over decades and getting it in the hands of those who need it most, so that, you know, people can move beyond loss and move toward recovery with a method that has been proven time and time again, helping hundreds of thousands of people do it. So it's pretty remarkable. So, Anne, from a more practical perspective, what does success look like for someone who completes this program?
You feel relief because you get to give some voice to some things that sometimes you don't even realize you're feeling. You don't even know there's a way to give voice to these things, and you're taught a very specific way to do that. And you do it with feelings. You're dropping down into your heart space because it's your heart that feels the grief, not your brain, not your intellect. So we're learning some very emotional ways to deal with that. When you're done with that, say you do it on a person who has died, that's probably one of the more common ones, you will be able to think about that person with much more joy, and you'll be able to enjoy and think about the joyful memories, the happy, the warm memories that you had about that person. And it won't be all sad all the time. You're able to let go of some of the very sad parts of the experience that you've had.
Can you share a real world example of how someone has benefited from this program?
I had a client whose mom had died, and she did the recovery program with me, and she kept saying, I feel really guilty. I wasn't with her when I died. And she just couldn't get over that. And we delved into it. We changed the word from guilt to regret. Guilt means that implies that you've done something on purpose to hurt someone on purpose. Sometimes we do that, and we do need to apologize for that. If you're feeling guilty because you weren't there or couldn't be there, or somebody died without you, for instance, you just say, I regret that happened because you didn't do anything on purpose to help them. So anyway, this woman went through that process, and she just felt so much better. And then she called me back and wanted to work on another loss where she had made so many choices that she didn't like in her life. She had been abused sexually when she was a little girl and felt that she kept picking men that were like that. And she just was so unhappy with herself, and why did she do that to herself, and how could she do that? So we worked on that, and for her that was very, very cathartic. We did it a different special way because everybody's loss is unique. So there was a loss of trust, a loss of safety, there was a lot of trauma that was mixed in with that. So we worked on that, and I think she was seeing a therapist at the same time, which is perfectly okay to do. But she felt so light after both of those. Like she could remember her mother and the nice things instead of the very end of her mother's life, which was very traumatic. So she was able to move forward with her mother's memories with joy.
Thank you for sharing that with us. What a gift it was for this woman to have you to work with and the support to move through this traumatic experience and toward recovery. That's amazing. When is the right time for someone to engage in a process? When have you found is the most productive time, and how is one to know when that time is for them?
I think you just get to the point where you don't feel like you're moving forward in your life and you can't stop being sad. And sometimes people get even sadder. Sometimes loss can affect the decisions that you're making, and you know that, but you don't know what to do with it. And that's when you would contact somebody to help you. Sometimes people want to jump right in after a loss, and sometimes people are not ready for that. I knew that was true, but I didn't know it personally until my husband passed away 5 months ago. And I still haven't done my grief recovery work. I'm getting ready to. It was sort of eye-opening to me that sometimes you have to it takes a little time before you do the actual work.
Yeah.
So you sort of know when you're ready, when you just can't take it anymore and you want to start moving. You feel like you really need to and want to start moving forward again.
Right.
And you don't know what else to do and you're not feeling better. That's when usually most people reach out for help.
And I'm so sorry about the loss of your husband. I think it's so interesting that you shared that it took you by surprise, that you weren't ready to engage in this process that you know so well. And I was just going to comment and say that I know that the work that you do will, this experience that you've had and you're going through right now, I know how meaningful that would be for someone who has lost somebody as significant as a spouse and a partner. And I find that, that our work gives us an opportunity to take our experiences and take the learning from these experiences and share those with others. And I know that will be true for you as well as you go through your own process of grieving and look forward to the recovery that you know is on the other side.
Yeah, and energetically, we attract people a lot of times that are like we are, that have experienced a lot of the same things that we've experienced. It's just how energy works.
Right, right. And we learn from those experiences and yeah.
We learn from them and we're able to empathize more with the people who have been through that too.
Yeah.
And you don't understand that or know it until it happens to you. And everybody who's grieving needs to just be really good to themselves. Allow yourself the time to grieve. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not be able to do things. And a lot of loss, whatever kind of loss, whether it's a person, a job, a pet, your whole life changes, and you have to learn a new way of living. And that giving voice to the loss that you've had and the things that have happened that's how you work through the grief. That's how you do it. You get into the nitty gritty of that. After you've learned a little bit what constitutes grief, then you can say, oh, that's, there are a lot of like aha moments during the learning of that seem so simple, but most people don't think of them as that's grief. That's how that works.
Yeah, that's how it shows up, and it shows up for everyone differently, but sometimes
it shows up. Yeah.
We don't attribute those things to that event or that experience. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So it's about lightening the pack, right? I mean, all this heaviness.
It's about emptying that backpack one rock at a time. Yep.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you're just going to have a different perspective on things and feel so much lighter. And because you'll feel lighter and you won't be holding on to the trauma, the grief, the sadness, the hard part of it, you're lighter. You're physically lighter. You're mentally lighter. And so you are able to move on much more easily than if you're carrying that all around in your body or in that, backpack.
Yeah.
And that's what helps people move on.
Yeah. And finding a way to honor. Yeah. And finding a way to honor it and honor the loss and honor the person or the experience.
You absolutely do that. We do something at the very end with some significant emotional statements that you maybe wouldn't have thought of before you knew everything and talked about this through the grief recovery method, and you're able to say those significant emotional statements. And it's very, very powerful when people are able to do that.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky to have been able to do this, to have been given this gift by my friend who I missed very much, to help people. Because sometimes if you're doing the spiritual work and somebody's grieving so deeply, they don't even realize how deeply, the spiritual work, the energy work isn't going to work. Some people who believed in God, it changes. They don't believe in God anymore. They're not in a place to do that. And after you do this, you're usually in a place where you can start to embrace that part of your life again if it's important to you.
Yeah.
And you can embrace anything that's important to you again, because it just lifts up your body, everything, your physical, your emotional. Your emotional affects your physical.
The thing that I love about this conversation is that first, there is recovery from grief, that it is possible, and that the information exists and the method is proven to help us do that. These small, correct actions that we can make and take to help move us toward recovery. That's a really hopeful message. There's
lightness, there's hope. You can experience joy. You will experience joy again in your life.
Yeah.
Around whatever the loss is, or with everything else too.
Yeah. So this is a 7-week program where one is guided every step of the way. And I know that you hold their hand, and I know that you work through Zoom or in person.
Even both hands can be held. And we all call ourselves a heart with big ears. So you tell us your story and we listen. We're very good listeners. And listening is somebody really listening and paying attention to what you're saying is a huge part of the recovery process. You walk every step of the way with somebody holding one or both of your hands. That's what we're here for.
So, Anne, how does someone contact you? I know that you had mentioned that you offer a free consultation, which I think is beautiful. And my understanding is this consultation enables someone to connect with you to determine whether this process is something that might be helpful for them, but also to understand where they are and what stage they're in and to see whether this is the right time for them. I love that. So they can come in just to get that sense and guidance from you alone seems incredibly valuable. How does someone reach you?
You can reach me through my website, www.andale.net, or through my email, anniehaldale@gmail.com.
Okay, great. So that's Annie, ANNIE, Hall, HALL, Dale, DALE @gmail.com. And the website was www.annedale.net. Perfect. I'll also be sure to leave that information in the show notes so people can contact you.
Yes.
You would also seem to be a good resource if someone actually did feel more comfortable working with someone in person. I'd imagine you could connect them directly with someone geographically convenient for them if they weren't able to work with you directly in person, though I do know you work remotely as well.
Yes, I could do that.
I am so appreciative of this time, and thank you so much for sharing with us. It certainly has been enlightening, and I hope helpful for the listeners to understand that one, grief comes in a lot of different forms. It's very unique to each individual, and that there is a process that one can work through with somebody like you, a grief recovery specialist. So you aren't doing this alone, and that there's a structured way that is evidence-based, that is how you actually move through this process based on years and years and years of understanding of how to help people work through grief. That I think offers great hope. And for that, I'm very grateful for the work that you do, and so thankful that you have come to share the work that you do and to educate us a little bit about what it is and what it isn't and how we are to work through this process, but also this beautiful message that there is lightness and joy that is possible again. And I think for those that are in the midst of grief, sometimes that's hard to believe.
It is hard to believe, and it is true. You can walk with joy again.
I hope this conversation was helpful. If you are struggling with grief, I hope that you reach out to Anne or somebody who can guide you through this process of recovery. What I learned is that recovery is available for each of us, and for that I am grateful. Thank you for joining me today. If this is something that you think another that you know can benefit from, please share it with them. I look forward to next time. In the meantime, take it easy.